Good afternoon. I'm Robert Rodregas, Chairman, Founder of Security Innovation Network. Honored to be here, especially with a good friend, General Hayden. Thank you for flying out this morning. And like the woman said, there's a little adjustment here. We're going to do a little personal one-on-one interview, touch on cyber. At the end, we'll have a break, and then please join us for the panel afterwards. And then the most important thing is our reception following that. So we're going to talk about General Hayden's public service, the qualities that define leadership, his formative years growing up on the north side of Pittsburgh as the son of a welder, and the persons who impacted his life and direction. The journey from his early days as a taxi driver, not to be confused with Travis Bickle from Robert De Niro's movie Taxi, and young analyst to the director of NSA and then CIA. Michael Vincent Hayden grew up on the north side of Pittsburgh, an area referred to as the Ward. The family moved to Brighton Heights in 1972 when their north side home was raised to make way for Three Rivers Stadium. Ironically, the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Dan Rooney, was General Hayden's 6th and 8th grade football coach. General Hayden's 36-year Air Force career began in 1969. In addition, he served as the Director of National Security Agency, the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, and the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. So, General, I want to go back to a 2006 interview where you mentioned you're a passionate Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and you love the team because it is focused on the sport itself. During this interview, you made an analogy about fixing U.S. intelligence using a coaching perspective. Figuring out how to make U.S. intelligence operatives work and work together is like an NFL coach getting the team, quote, to emphasize the scoreboard rather than individual performance. Would you elaborate more on the scoreboard versus the individual, and how we can, as disparate IT security professionals, think about the bigger picture in order for us to act more like a team than as individuals?
Sure. Thanks, Robert. And thank you all for the opportunity to have this chat this afternoon. And as Robert mentioned, I'll be speaking tomorrow on some aspects of cyber war and where I think American military thinking is on the whole concept of cyber conflict. Robert just laid out kind of unity of effort on 3 levels in the NFL and in the intelligence community, and then in the IT community. And frankly, I think unity of effort in the NFL is the easiest of those 3 to put together. Lots of reasons. I think everybody knows their roles, and you know how well you're doing because the scoreboard's up there. Now transfer that imagery, and I know most of you don't live inside the Beltway, but I unfortunately do. Transfer that imagery to the kerfluffle we've just had over the past month or so about the Director of National Intelligence. Okay? And try to imagine now, how does the administration, how does the American government, how do the American people get the unity of effort we would like to have on an NFL team out of the American intelligence community? It's a far more complex task. I'm not sure who the team captain is. I don't think the coach has enough authority over his players. And the impact on the IC, the intel community, is pretty much the impact you'd see in an NFL team under those circumstances. Moving to the world you're more familiar with, I think it's even more challenging. Your expertise is so rich in both its technological sophistication and in its newness that I don't frankly think, to badly mix metaphors, I don't frankly think we've beaten down trails in the forest so we know where the paths are. And the the blessing from your technology and your entrepreneurship and your work over the last several decades has been this tremendous blossoming of technology that's fundamentally changed our lives. And we're trying, and I'll mention this tomorrow in more detail, we don't know how to deal with it at the institutional level. We don't know how to take your discovery, and I mean that with big D, not discrete discoveries, but to take your discovery and organize around it for effectiveness. We're still trying to take something that is so new, what it is you've created, and jam it into old structures, whether they be how we fund it or how we conduct oversight on it or how we plan for it, and so on. And I don't despair, but Robert, it's going to take some period of time before the community represented here begins to settle into roles that begin to resemble the familiarity of roles we might see on an NFL team. Sorry, let me, one final thought. I get a lot of questions about the intel community and the Director of National Intelligence and how that thing's working, and generally people throw out pretty pejorative terms, like stovepipes and failure to share and Cold War mentalities and so on. I try to cut through that and not focus on it. I simply say managing the IC is like managing any complex organization. And when you manage any complex organization, managing the American intelligence community, you have to balance two things that are virtues. One is autonomy of action for the parts, and the other is unity of effort for the whole. If you don't have enough autonomy of action, you lose initiative. If you don't have unity of effort, you're not synchronized. It's hard enough in the intelligence community. Now think with me for a moment. I've come here to learn from you. What's the right balance between individual autonomy and unity of effort in the technological realm that you represent? It's not anything, frankly, it's not something we've discovered. It's not something we've really had a discussion about. Because frankly, the flowering of your technology has been based upon an almost pure freedom of action from the individual level. And you probably heard from Jane this morning some of the challenges that we're facing in security, and you'll hear from me tomorrow about some of the challenges we face in security. That's the unity of effort guys coming in from the side door, bumping up against your autonomy and your freedom of action, which has created so much. It's going to be an interesting dialogue.
I'm going to go over to your formative years growing up as the son of a welder to driving a taxi to director of the NSA and CIA. Who were the most important persons that impacted your life and direction?
Well, you mentioned Danny Rooney was my football coach in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Dan was probably the first contact that I had with anyone whose personal experience was much beyond my neighborhood. And so I had that was really an opportunity to meet, be with him, to see some of the things that he was able to see the world through his eyes. Dan's now the U.S. ambassador to Ireland. He's no longer with the football team, and I must admit this is probably a bit selfish on my part, but after Dan got named to be ambassador, this individual who I viewed as a mentor and a teacher for me for half a century is calling me back, asking me how the federal government works. It was a tough question, but it was satisfying getting the question.
So speaking of full circle, on the way down here, you mentioned that you actually took over as coach, I think when you were in college?
Yeah, I mean, Dan was the coach. It's a Catholic grade school football league. I mean, Pittsburgh lives and dies in football. And Dan was my coach, and he got too busy with the Steelers. And so my last year in college and 2 years in graduate school, I took over the team.
Great.
And won more games than he did.
We have many young people in the audience, General. And most of us face that fork in the road where we have to decide what direction we intend to go. And not only just for young people, but people that are in the government looking at their exit strategy and the fear of potentially going from government public service into private industry and the risks that go with that. What made you decide to choose the public service road and why?
I'm going to answer that quickly, and then another thought strikes me, Robert. There was a war in Vietnam. ROTC was mandatory. I took the course, and everybody in my neighborhood joined the service, and so did I, and I stayed there. More broadly, and again, it comes back, I'm trying to just offer a few thoughts to this particular audience. I was at Sun Valley about a month ago for a conference put on by the Allen Corporation. And Allen invests in IT, entertainment, media companies. It was one of those events where you just kind of sat at the lunch table and said, I know him, I know her, I know him. I mean, it was people you'd well recognize. It was a wonderful conference, and it was the kind of the center of the universe of American technology and entrepreneurship. It was wonderful. About 2 weeks later, I had to take my wife, who's on the National Military Family Association board, down to a Purple Camp. It's a camp we put on for children of military people who are deployed. Okay, so they go to summer camp, but they go to summer camp with kids in the same circumstance, so it's a mutual support group. We were driving down I-95 and stopped to get a bite to eat at the last exit in North Carolina. We got off, there was only one place to eat, it was a truck stop. Okay. Now remember, a fresh memory of this experience in Sun Valley where, you know, Bill and Melinda were getting on the elevator and Warren Buffett was walking by and so on. We walked into the truck stop. As you walk in, there's an announcement that every Thursday night there's a Bible study at the truck stop at 7 o'clock. There are Bible texts there for you to pick up. Went into the dining area, pretty full, so it was more than just the I-95 traffic. There were people coming from the neighborhood. Most of the men in there were eating dinner in their baseball caps. I had pulled pork sandwich and fried green tomatoes. There were 2 TV sets on, and both of them were on the Fox News. And I just had the thought that this is very different from that Sun Valley crowd. And my wife pointed out that if you asked how many of these people sitting around us here today had a close relative in the armed forces, the percentage at the truck stop in 995 would be significantly greater than the percentage you would gotten out of the folks at Sun Valley. And so I'm turning your question back on you, Robert, or maybe back on to friends in the audience. You watch the folks who volunteer for the American Security Services, the intelligence community, and the American Armed Forces. They are magnificent. How do we get that same kind of patriotism, selflessness, service before self out of the kinds of folks that are represented here and were represented at Sun Valley? I know one of your questions later for the panel is going to talk about the Manhattan Project. And why don't we have a Manhattan Project for cyber things? And one of the things I'm going to point out is the culture is different. And so you asked me about my life of service. I made a choice, and that's where I ended up. But more broadly, can the American Republic survive in the kind of world in which we are in if we take a disproportionate fraction of our public servants out of the families of those folks I saw in 995 as opposed to the folks I saw at Sun Valley?
Would you briefly talk about what you're doing today and how was that transition from public to private?
Yes, I left government service, not completely voluntarily, in February of 2009. I was concerned about, living that life and that pace and how things would be. I've surprised myself with being quite comfortable where I am. I enjoy the ability to say more things than I used to be able to say. I still can't say all the things I wish I could say, but being able to say more of the things has been quite rewarding. So, you ask about service, and I think it applies to all the folks in the room here as well. We each have an opportunity to contribute. And okay, I'm not in uniform, not in federal service, but frankly, most of the achievements in our country come out of the private sector, so I'm glad to be part of it.
Great. So I mentioned that we're going to talk about personal and then move to cyber, and then we'll end up with some personal notes. Perfect Citizen, new initiative announced by the National Security Agency to increase situational awareness of cyber assaults on industry and government systems. What are the pros and cons of such a program? And what can the NSA do to build trust with our citizens that will ensure confidence that this program is managed properly?
Okay. Y'all familiar with what Robert just brought up, Perfect Citizen? Rich, you're familiar, right? Yeah. This is an NSA program that was the subject of a Wall Street Journal report by Siobhan Gorman. It was an NSA, by the way, I'm out of government, so I know what I read in the papers. It was an NSA program, it was a contract to, I believe, Raytheon to develop tech, okay, Raytheon crowd back there, okay, good. Okay, to develop technology that would help defend critical infrastructure against cyber attack. Okay, that sounds like right smack dab in the middle of the lane that you would want NSA to be playing in, because it does have a cyber defense function. And Siobhan, she's Siobhan Gorman from the Journal, who used to be the Baltimore Sun reporter, so she's quite familiar with things NSA. Siobhan writes this up like it's coming after your and my personal freedom probably by Tuesday morning. And I don't know the details, all right? And I'm not even going to try to find out. But that was just another illustration for me of one of the problems we have, and I know we'll get into it in the panel later, Robert, is how do we do the kinds of things we have to do? And let's talk about internet security, okay? Which, if we are to be successful, have to be very powerful and, frankly, from time to time, somewhat secretive, inside a political culture that distrusts probably only two things: power and secrecy. And my experience at the national level, and I've got to be careful not to start whining here, because I've had very powerful and positive dialogue with a lot of reporters, all right? But the general instinct of reporting on government activity, intelligence activity, and especially cyber activity, is for the reporter to take the story by the hand and walk it as fast as he or she can into the darkest corner of the room. So that rather than informing the public dialogue about dangers and responses to dangers and so on, it misshapes the public dialogue. And I don't know what to do about that other than make little sermonettes like I just did. The folks in this room have a lot, and the folks back there who actually know some of the details, have a lot more they can say about this to set the record straight, although there are limits. You know, the last thing you want to do is, let me tell you how good this is and how it works, so I don't have bad newspaper stories written about me, is probably not the best of all possible worlds by putting the technology out there. So again, it's an area that the broader political culture makes things harder than they really should be.
During our preparation a couple weeks ago, I'm looking at my notes, when this topic came up, you mentioned like an analogy to the Terrorist Advantage Program.
Terrorist Advantage Program?
Right, that was under your watch.
Yeah.
And are there some similarities with that messaging with the press and what's starting to become here possibly?
Yeah, we're kind of going into the portion of the program that's going to be press bashing, so just hang on, we'll do that for a few minutes here. And with what's going on with WikiLeaks, why not, right? Again, what Robert's referring to is the NSA program that monitored al-Qaeda communications into and out of the United States under President Bush's authorization as Commander-in-Chief shortly after the September 11th attacks. I did it. I'm glad I did it. And the people at NSA who did it really, really well. Surprisingly, with an incredible respect for American privacy. Now, the story gets written up as if the folks at NSA are reading everyone in this room's email on a daily basis. It simply wasn't true. It's a long story. It takes too much time to go into it. And frankly, I can only get to a certain level and then I got to stop because of classification. But to relate, in the room in which we did the terrorist surveillance program, all right, that's comms in and out of the U.S., which we have reason to believe are one or both ends are affiliated with Al-Qaeda, all right? I've been in the room. You go in there and you work. It's small. I mean, it's not the massive program that people pretended it was. And in the center of the room, there's a sign hanging down. And the sign simply says, what constitutes a U.S. person? Now, anybody here with NSA background knows I'm referring to something called UCIT 18, which is the procedures we use to protect anybody out there who's protected by the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So in this room, in which NSA was doing its most aggressive collection, in which it truly was touching, bumping against U.S. privacy in a way that it had not done before the presidential authorization. Foremost in the minds of the NSA folks who were doing it were the standard protections of American privacy. Didn't show up in anybody's story. All right, the story out there, particularly from the press on both coasts, is still this terribly ominous program. So again, it doesn't inform a public dialogue. It tends to misshape it. That's the connection between the two programs.
Right. Thank you. Do you believe our nation is prepared for a large cyber attack on our critical infrastructures and our command and control systems? And if not, why?
Oh, sure, we're ready. No. No.
kind of led him down that path, right?
I'm a little less over the edge on this than Dick Clark is. Okay. Even Mike McConnell. Okay. Mike, and I'll mention this a little bit in the keynote tomorrow. Mike throws out, we had a wonderful op-ed in the Washington Post about 3 months ago. I mean, it was long, and they blocked out the middle of the op-ed page in the Sunday section. So it must have been about 1,500 words, and they don't like you to write much more than 850. So they gave Mike, former DNI, a lot of room to work. And he says we are at war, and we're being defeated, and the time to start defending ourselves was yesterday. All right. So I don't quite get to that kind of language. Okay. But we are under attack, and I'm going to spend some time tomorrow trying to make a distinction between espionage and war, but we'll save that for tomorrow. Mike McConnell and I were in Manhattan around the end of April. And it was the former DNI, former DCIA, and George Tenet was there too, another former DCI. And we were in the room with, the only adequate description I can give you is a bunch of Wall Street types, okay? So you get the sense of the audience. And the purpose of it was to discuss cyber. And so we're getting asked a few questions, and Mike's saying what he's saying, and I'm saying what I'm saying. And we're talking a lot about things that are very familiar to the folks in this room, so I won't go into them very much. And we could tell that these folks were pretty much following along. All right, yeah, okay, we get your point here, we get your point here, we get your point here. And then about midway through the main course, one of the folks in attendance asked the absolute core question that now in retrospect was on everybody's mind in that room. Because maybe we just spent 45 minutes telling them the earth was about to end because of the danger of cyber assault. And one of the entrepreneurs kind of leaned forward, as I said, about midway through the meal and looked at Mike and me and said, "How much do you think this is going to cost me?" And that was a tremendously revealing moment for us. Now, he wasn't talking about after the attack, what's going to be the bomb damage assessment. He was going to say, what he was saying was, how much of the money that I really don't want to spend on this am I really going to have to spend on this? And please don't tell me it's a big number. And until we get beyond that attitude, until we get beyond that mindset, that cyber defense is an added cost, that subtracts from efficiency and profit. And until we get there, the answer to your question is no, we're not ready.
Thank you. Prior to the summer of 1941, America's foreign intelligence organizations were fragmented and isolated from each other, hence the appointment of William Donovan as the first coordinator of information, which was in the following year or so designated as the Office of Strategic Services, and then in 1947, the Central Intelligence Agency. Subsequent congressional law established the D&I position as a designated leader of the U.S. intelligence communities. The result of these transformations have led to great strides in the coordination, assimilation, and sharing of information among different agencies. What lessons have we learned from dissolving these walls towards more effective information sharing practices in the world of cyber, especially in the recent Washington Post article that highlighted the large and segmented IC and questioning their productivity and the large expense to do so?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a longer answer than you counted on, but I'll be efficient. There are two major stories in the press in the last 10 days. One was this three-parter from Dana Priest and Bill Arkin on contractors and the size of the intelligence community. And then the last one is the WikiLeaks story and all that's running out there. There's actually connective tissue between those two stories, at least in my mind. Okay, so just bear with me, because frankly, you're involved in the kinds of folks represented in this room are involved in that connective tissue. First point on the Dana Priest story. That story took as a given that reliance on the private sector by the American intelligence community was at best, how to put it, it wasn't a good thing. All right. In any area in which we were relying on the public sector, we better have a really good reason as to why we're doing it, as opposed to government employees. In other words, if you're using a contractor to do something, you got to explain yourself. I mean, that's the fundamental tone of the article. I find that remarkable. Okay, truth in lending, as director of CIA, I cut our reliance on contractors 15%. All right. But I did that because we just spent a lot of money on contractors after 9/11, and I knew there were inefficiencies in the system, and I could cut it 15%, and I probably still had a lot of fat left before I started to get the muscle. So I did that. But to imagine that we have to explain ourselves to go to the broader elements of American society for expertise is really quite a puzzling proposition. I don't know why we have to be defensive about that. And so, I mean, one of the themes I know of this gathering is how can we work in more shared responsibilities, more common efforts against common national problems. I mean, it's the root of half the questions you've asked me this afternoon. And yet we now have reinserted on us this, in my mind, artificial divide between private sector and public sector for a lot of things. And I think it really, really creates serious wounds when it comes to things cyber. Because so much of American expertise is in the private sector. I'm looking at friends here from NSA. And I remember thinking when I was director of NSA, okay, the National Security Agency created American computing. Okay? And it bled out from NSA to the rest of American society. I mean, that is no longer true. All right? There's no way anything run by any government can do the kinds of things that are required to do to survive in the information space, the information technology space that's out there today. Okay? So you want me on government procurement contracts to keep up with Osama bin Laden's gang, who goes down to whatever the local Radio Shack is called and gets the next generation technology every 6 months. And I can't. That's impossible. And so the first thing that was offensive about the series in the Post was that it just took the assumption that if you're using contractors, using outsiders, if you weren't blue badgers, government employees, you had to explain yourself. That's really bad. WikiLeaks is kind of another chapter in the story. Now, you talked about sharing and so on. Since 9/11, I was in government over 8 years since 9/11, all at the national level. I must have testified scores, if not hundreds of times, in front of congressional committees. Whenever anything went wrong, okay, it could have been a plot just barely disrupted, or something we learned later than ideally we should have learned, or maybe indeed a plot wasn't disrupted and it happened. I got slapped around routinely by members of both parties, members of both houses, about the failure to share, okay? That you didn't share enough information. Sharing became an absolute good, okay? Sharing became its own metric. It's a little bit like, if you're using contractors, you better explain yourself. Well, with regard to sharing, if it's not in the common title pool, I want to know why. You've got to explain yourself. Now, those of us in government working the problem, actually, would say, no, Senator, yes, Senator, we got it, Senator, yes, sir, Senator, we're gonna share. No, Senator, we're making good progress. And, yes, Senator, no, Senator, 3 bags full, Senator. And way in the back of your mind, you had that little thing called a conscience saying, you never said this aloud. Yes, Senator, but sharing ain't all it's cracked up to be. There are real dangers with sharing. And we just had them displayed this past week. Okay. Look at what all was available on SIPRNet for what appears to be one or merely a very small number of evildoers, and what they were able to do, because there are no longer many watertight doors on the ship of secrets. Okay. Now, that's my story. Here's my challenge to you folks. The reaction against this is going to be to push back against sharing. The reaction against this is going to be, so why is that available to every E4 in America's Army? Okay. You can help. Okay. What's the technology available that allows us to not turn back the clock on necessary sharing, but still reasonably guard us against what happened this past week? Okay, is it some sort of security structure? I don't know. Is it real-time keystroke monitoring with algorithms to say that's a strange? I mean, the kind of thing that wakes up Visa at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, Hayden just used a credit card in Nigeria. I think we're shutting them off. Okay, how do we do that inside the national security structure that allows us to continue the sharing ethic, and yet reasonably protects us against this very, very dark side? And by the way, if we assume it was the kid who did the helicopter video, and I have no knowledge, so I'm just knowing what I read in the paper, if we assume it's him, this was what, an E4 and E5 surfing only on SIPRNet. So in one sense, if you got to get a wake-up call, this is as bad as it is, it's probably as good as you could hope for. But it should be a real warning shot across the bow that we really need now to take into account these counterintelligence concerns, even as we share more and more. Now, that's a great job for Jim Clapper to take on when he gets confirmed by the Senate next week.
Right. Those are very thought-provoking positions on both sides. So, next question is to the audience, and I'd like you to raise your hand if you feel you have a strong understanding of the mission and responsibilities of the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Director of National Intelligence Office.
I want to talk to you people afterwards. I want you to explain it to me.
So, General, would you mind explaining the different roles and mission?
Yeah, look, we're a very rich and very powerful nation. When we have a problem, we throw resources at the problem. It's what we do all the time, all right? When was the last time you were in a meeting that actually said, hey, this is a really difficult issue. Let's just throw more human beings at it. that is acultural for Americans. Okay? We throw money and we throw technology at these problems. And so we did that after 9/11. So it's not surprising that, what can I say that's not indictable? My budget doubled. There you go, okay? The CIA budget doubled between the week before 9/11 and the week I left government, all right? And so you've got this tremendous growth. There is reasonable understanding about lanes in the road. It's not nearly as bad as described in the Dana Priest, Bill Arkin article. Is it perfect? No. Back to the NFL metaphor. Do we need to know who the team captain is? Yes. Does the coach need to have a bit more authority over the players? Absolutely. All right. But we're not talking about a binary thing where all is chaos and we now must go to order. All right. We're talking about important but marginal improvements in synchronization, harmonization, and deconfliction.
Thank you. So in closing, we're going to go back to the personal side. First question, what event in military history do you most admire?
In my leisure time, I really do like to read books about the American Civil War and to just sit there and recognize the incredible heroism of our countrymen. I want to share this with the group. At NSA, we generally have home and home with our English-speaking partners, particularly with the Brits. On leadership team meetings, go across the Atlantic. Even number of years, we go to Great Britain, and they put us up in some lovely country home south of London. Odd number of years, they come to Glen Burnie, Maryland. We put them up in the Motel 6, and we have meaningful professional discussions. We took the Brits up to Gettysburg on one of those trips. There's a legend out there in the rest of the world that says Americans are so casualty averse that they just can't, they can't stick it out. I was there with Sir Francis Richards, who was the head of GCHQ at the time, and we were down there along Seminary Ridge, where Longstreet and Lee and Pickett were on day 3 of the battle. And we were looking up at the copse of trees up there on Cemetery Ridge, where the Union Army was. And we had a docent with us from the Army War College, and he was guiding it. And we were going to walk it. We were going to walk Pickett's charge. Okay? And we started going up, and he turned, and I think he was mostly talking to the British audience. We're only a dozen folks. He turned and said to all of us, but I think talking to the Brits, now in the next 75 minutes, more Americans will die than died 81 years later on the beaches of Normandy on the 6th of June. We're tough people. We've gone through hard problems. When you read about what really very ordinary people, for God's sake, the hero of Gettysburg is a rhetoric professor from Bowdoin College. What really normal Americans were able to accomplish, despite how difficult the problems we face today seem to be, we as a nation have the resources. As a nation, not as a government, we as a nation have the resources to handle them.
What are the most critical components of a leader?
Frankly, I actually say this when I go back and do some mentoring of officers now, dance with who you brung. You've got to be who you are. Okay, and you can't, I'm the squadron commander now, so I've got to be, you've got to be the personality that God created for you. And so I would just say, be true to yourself, even in those positions of increased responsibility.
Who are the real heroes, or who are your heroes in real life?
This is going to sound corny, but it's what comes to mind, okay? In my last couple of jobs, okay, my time in war zones was almost military tourism, you know? I'd fly in with an ecosystem to protect me and sustain my communications wherever I was going. But I would really try to go visit the troops. In the last job, it was stations and bases for CIA, but they were thoroughly integrated, all right? The people who are involved in the American security establishment are frankly the very best of the American culture, of the American society. There wasn't a trip I took, no matter how demanding it was, how long we flew, how many nights we had on the airplane, that I didn't come back re-energized and sustained by the troops that I visited. So I took my energy from those folks.
What natural gift would you like to possess?
I'm very comfortable talking to 400 people. I'm not nearly as comfortable talking to 4. I wish that was easier for me to do.
What do you like?
I like football.
What do you dislike?
I used to love baseball. It seems to be so slow moving now.
What was your favorite occupation, position, and why?
The last job was the best job any American could ever have. Being director of CIA, not an easy task, but to be able to have people say, I got to see you right now at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, come into your office, lay a map out, throw some pictures there, talk to somebody over here, hit the red switch, talk to somebody on the other side of the world, make a decision, go home, come to work the next morning, and get the pictures as to what happened, that's a real good feeling. The second best job I had, and the best one until I got the last one, I was a military attaché in a communist bloc country during the Cold War. That was like being a juvenile delinquent. You had to have no respect for the laws of the host country, and the only thing you had to be careful was not to present some armed 19-year-old Bulgarian soldier with a decision that was too tough for him to handle.
What would you have liked to be?
I'm fine.
Last question.
Center fielder, but that's a long time ago.
What is your passion, General?
I've been blessed. I've had wonderful work. I've worked with wonderful people, some of whom I recognize in the room here. I'm looking forward to talking to afterwards. Putting me where you put me, I got to see things that nobody growing up on the north side of Pittsburgh ever expected to see. I mean, when you sit down with King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia and have an hour's chat about the Iranians, I mean, it's hard to fathom. Less good, but still a strong impression. In retrospect, incredibly rewarding, is be in the sit room and have the President of the United States at one end of the table appear to be making eye contact with you and asking you a very difficult and very important question. And you know full well that he's actually looking at the guy behind you, because there's no way he could possibly be asking you that. And you realize there is no one behind you. Okay? Although they weren't all that fun at the time, looking back, what a special place.
Great. In closing, 3 words that I captured here. You can help. We need your great minds. We need your innovation. We need your technology. And we got to move from me to we and us against them, the adversaries. Thank you for your time. And General, thank you.
Thank you. I'll see you all in the morning.